Hello and welcome to SpyHards podcast. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur on the run.
And we are here continuing our journey into 1988 version of Robert Ludlum's classic, The Bourne Identity. And we have a very special guest joining us.
Yes, we are joined by Primetime Emmy-winning director Roger Young, who was responsible for helming the 1988 Bourne Identity miniseries.
Indeed. It's a story that's never quite been told, funnily enough. It's strange that no one's really done the deep dive onto the first adaptation of this story, but we're here to break it all to you. So without further ado, Cam, roll the interview. And joining us now on the show, he is a director, he is a writer, he is a producer, he is a recipient of a Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Directing in a Drama Series. It is Mr. Roger Young. Hello, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Nice to meet you.
It's a pleasure to have you here. We're looking forward to talking about the Bourne Identity with you and sort of filling in some of the gaps in the puzzle that is this TV movie adaptation of the classic Robert Ludlum book. But I think before we get there, the first question we have for basically everyone on the show, what got you into filmmaking in the first place? What inspired you to become a filmmaker?
I went to the University of Illinois. I'm from Illinois, in journalism, and they started back then there was no cinema schools or, people to teach you how to direct or anything like that. But there was this one guy who was sort of had a passion to try to do that. And he was a professor. And so he started a Friday evening. We actually put on a show that went on the PBS station at that time every Friday, and I found out I could direct. It sort of came. And when I graduated, I went to Indianapolis and produced and directed shows there in the NBC station. I did the Indianapolis 500 time trials, and I did the state basketball championship, everything that they had. And from there, I moved to Chicago and started with Foot Cone and Belding, which is an advertising agency, and was a producer there for a year, and then got hired to direct with a local studio that was making commercials in Chicago, and then another local studio. And then I started my own company. And then a friend of mine who had been in Chicago doing similar to what I was doing had moved to LA, and he came back one Christmas, and we both went out and got drunk together, and he said, you got to come out, you would do great, you got to come out. So having my own business, I had quite a bit of money already in the bank, and so I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. So I kept the business going, but I went out to LA, and it took me about 3 months to get a job as an associate producer on a movie of the week. Because the writer told me, they bought the picture, but I don't know anything about how to produce it. Can you do that? And I said, sure. It's just like a long commercial. So he paid me $4,000 for 6 months' work, and that got me a job as associate producer. I'm sorry this is going so long.
No,
got me
go for it.
As the associate producer on a series called Lou Grant.
Yeah.
With Ed Asner, and the job that they gave me was overseeing the editing and also hiring new directors. So I got to look at an awful lot of work that other directors were doing, and I also got to be on the stage all the time so I could see directors working. And that became a year of learning how to direct. And second year they gave me a shot. I won an Emmy, and that it took off from there.
They say the best way to learn is sort of, in the midst of it. The way to learn a language is to go to the country and practice there. You learn directing by basically being around directors. That's the perfect way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what I would do, I met a guy named John Badham, who was a director, and he had been an associate producer at Universal before he started shooting. And he told me that what he did was he played dead director. He would pretend that the director died, overnight, and that they said to him, John, you got to do today's work. So he would prepare himself as if he had to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, that's brilliant. And so I started doing that. So I would take the scripts from tomorrow and figure out how I would shoot them. And then I would go in and watch the real guy shoot them. And, I would either feel, oh, I see, he did that better than I would have done that. He did this, and et cetera. Or I would also think, oh, I could have done that much better. I would have done this. And that was my university, really. I did a year.
Did you have any like filmmaking influences around this time as you're kind of going down this rabbit hole? Are you looking at, going to the movies and observing direction? Was there anyone that stood out to you?
Yeah, David Lean. I saw Lawrence of Arabia. I thought it was the greatest picture I'd ever seen. And I went to see it. I've seen it like 30 times now, and while I was in school and while this early directing thing was happening, there was on campus, or just off campus rather, there was a theater that ran a lot of foreign movies, and not just the silly movies from that period. So I really went to see them a lot, and I learned a lot watching what those guys were doing. And, because you see it once for the story, you see it after that for how they shot it. And that became a real, it was obvious to me that I had some kind of talent for that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I could watch and see what they were doing and know how they did it. And, what I had to learn was what the lenses did and what the different lenses did to different faces and all of that sort of thing. But yeah, I met David Lean once.
Oh, really?
Later on, I was at Shepperton editing something. I don't remember which picture it was. And I was having there. You have lunch in a sort of lunchroom, even the executives, etc. And sitting at the table was his assistant editor, and he was there editing something. And I said, and he came in one day, and I said, "That's David Lean." And she said, "Yeah, I work for him." I said, "Oh God, I'd love to meet him." She says, "Well, okay, you should. He's right over there. Just go say hi." I said, "I can't just walk up to David Lean and say hi." And that happened like 4 days in a row. And on the fourth day or whatever it was, she said to me, if you want to meet him, you better go, because he's leaving to scout, and he won't be back for 2 months. At that moment, he got up to leave. And so I ran in front of him and opened the door to him. And he said, "Will you get out of the way?" That was all I had with David Lean.
That makes for the best story, though. It's kind of like the Spielberg, John Ford story. It's like they're more fun when they're kind of punchy and kind of outside of what you expect. It's not the inspirational words kind of moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. No, he was in a hurry.
And I was taking a look through the work you did in TV movies and things like that, and I noticed a lack of espionage and sort of spy stories. And we're going to talk about one in a minute, but I just wanted to ask you, as sort of to preface that, is in terms of you going to see pictures and getting to grips with directing, did you have any love for spy cinema at all? Any spy films you were sort of gravitated to, even when you were younger, perhaps?
Not really. No, I think when I started to get really fascinated by that was James Bond, and and what they then did with the Bourne pictures, long after I had anything to do with them. So I can't, in response to your question, I can't even remember one that I might have seen early on. No, I was just interested in stories and in characters.
It's actually perhaps sometimes perfect as well, because sometimes you have fans will come in and do work on something. Someone will really love a piece of work or a genre and then work in that genre, and it may not be the best thing they could do. They may think about it too much because they love it too much. So you're coming into a Bourne story, a spy story, more or less fresh, which is a good way of doing it. And speaking of Bourne. I think the question is, and to lead us in, how did you get connected with the Bourne Identity? How did that come to you?
Alan Shane asked me to come meet him, and he wanted to offer me this miniseries, and he told me it was going to be shot in Zurich and Paris, and et cetera, et cetera. And why would I say no? I loved the idea of shooting outside the United States. It was great, and Richard Chamberlain was a big star at that time, as was Jacqueline. So no, it was a no-brainer.
Did you read the book in preparation? Like, were you familiar with? You did, okay.
Yeah, I did not talk to Ludlum until afterwards. He called me at home one night after the picture. I don't know. I don't remember if it had been on the air already or if they had sent him a disc or something. But he loved what we did, and I think mostly because we pretty much stuck to the book. We didn't go too far away. I mean, what they did after us really didn't have much relationship to the book. And so we tried to, Carol Sobieski, who I also didn't ever meet.
Oh, really?
No, we talked, but I didn't. She's from Canada, and I think she didn't come down. And that was one of the things that I really wanted to do. I wanted to stay faithful to the book because the book was such a big seller, and it seemed to me that people would get angry if you changed it too much. However, I got to tell you, if I were doing it today, and I watched it the other day because it'd been a long time since I had seen it, I think I would try to change the character somewhat in that. Well, for instance, with Bourne, making him not so innocent at the beginning, so that maybe he really is Carlos and just doesn't know it yet, And for instance, let's say when the guy recognizes him on the streets and in that tunnel kind of place in Paris or outside of Paris, I would have him just kick the shit out of that guy. He'd be so good at fighting, and he was actually enjoying it.
Yeah.
Different from the way we staged it, because we staged it the way it is in the book. So that you are, as the viewer, because simply because this was the first time we did this, you don't know him. The other guys after me, they already know who the character was, so they really had to change it, I think. And it would also be interesting for her, I think, to not be really sure, is he a killer or not? Not fall in love so fast.
Right.
And the doctor, for instance, I would make him very tempted by this bank numbers that he has in his possession now. Maybe even calls the bank to find out if it's real. And we're not sure if he's going to give that to Richard or not, before he leaves.
I think one of the critiques of the book, and you're sort of highlighting it there, is there's a lot of coincidence, especially like he gets picked up by this doctor who basically just saves him without really asking for anything in return. And then he bumps into Jacqueline Smith's Marie, and that all just sort of falls in his lap more or less as well. And he kind of finds his way through it. And speaking of like attacking that guy in the corridor, because if you think of what the 2002, I think it was, Matt Damon film did, they have, I think the French policeman wake him up, or the Swiss policeman wake him up, and he beats the living daylights out of both of them. And then he sort of snaps out of it and realizes what he's did. I think it's sort of, they basically took that note without reading it and did that with the film. So yeah, they did sort of go that way in the end.
Well, then I'm stealing.
Technically, you did this first, so it's fine. You're the OG. It's all good. And you actually answered one of my follow-up questions when you sort of said about how you got connected with it, because I was going to ask about casting. But it sounds like it was pitched to you as having Chamberlain and Jacqueline Smith already signed to the project.
Yeah, because at that time, you really had to have stars in it before they would give it a green light.
Right. And I was curious, just in terms of the difference in this era of film versus TV. And, you've worked on motion pictures before this. You did the Michael Keaton film, The Squeeze. But like when you're doing one of these, TV events, what is the kind of the lead up, the development period? Is it like a lot faster paced?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't remember what kind of prep we had in this in terms of time, but I do know that we went to Europe pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Went to Zurich, etc. And I picked the locations. I remember changing the locations a lot from what the location guy was showing me into what I really wanted to use. Partly because I was told, Trocadero, is that how you say it, in Paris? You'd never get that, but I did, so it just was a question of talking to the people who were in charge and, making them feel that we weren't going to blow anything up or whatever. No, and watching the picture, I was proud of the locations. I thought we did a really nice job in getting where we shot.
It's actually one of the things that we noted down as a really great part of it too. There's a really great shot. I think Bourne has just had a fight with someone, and he's just it's like the Eiffel Tower is framed in the background. It's actually like the same set they used for the most recent John Wick film. They use those same steps, so it's still being used, but like it's all perfectly framed. It's wonderful. So they're still using the place you use. And this is as you say, a TV movie compared to like the money John Wick has thrown behind it these days. So yeah, some wonderful location work.
Yeah, no, there was no CGI there because there was no CGI, yet. No, those places were real.
And I want to ask if you had any memories of working with cinematographer Tony Pierce Roberts, who has some real spy cred because he had done the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy miniseries as well. Just curious if you had any memories there.
Yeah, and it's not a particularly good one. I don't think Tony liked me very much.
Oh.
I'm not sure why, but partly because I'm sure I don't, I know what I want to do with the camera when I'm there. The moment that I see the location, and I'm not interested in a lot of discussion about it. I just know where it's going, and I know which lens to use, and etc. So, and I think maybe that didn't sit well with him. A lot of cinematographers want to be involved in the direction, in my eyes, and to me, that's my job. In addition to working with the actors, and that's what makes it fun. And we didn't do a lot about that. He did, I think, do a great job in terms of lighting it. And he's a nice guy, but I just got the feeling that he was just standing back waiting for me to die.
Right.
Well, you didn't. It's a wonderful piece, and I think for the fans of the book, actually much prefer this version to the Matt Damon film.
Yeah, for obvious reasons.
For sure. Now, one thing I want to talk about, I don't want to get into sort of the micro of stuff like budget, because that stuff is probably lost to time. We won't know exactly how much was spent on it, that sort of thing. But as it is a TV movie compared to sort of your work in film, I imagine this is a much smaller budget to work with. You're really sort of having to work to get everything right, especially with locations as well. Was it quite a tight production when it comes to money?
It always is, but it really wasn't classified as a TV movie. It was a miniseries because it was 4 hours.
Right.
So it split up into 2 nights.
Okay.
They showed it on Monday and Tuesday usually. I don't know for sure if that's the case here, but that's what they usually did. And you always had to have a cliffhanger, halfway through it, which we did. So it had a bigger budget than the normal TV movie, which sometimes was as little as $2 million. I don't know. I don't remember what it is. Probably you can look it up, but we stayed in nice hotels and we traveled around Europe, so there must have been some money somewhere. I remember Alan Shane, who was an executive at Warner Brothers for like 10 years before he did this. And at one point in the shooting, he said to me, "I didn't realize how hard this is. this is really difficult, isn't it? I said, you've been working at a studio for 10 years and you don't know how hard it is to make a film? He says, yeah, that's terrible, isn't it? But yeah, there's never enough money, ever. Doesn't matter how big it is, because the more money, the bigger it gets. The Squeeze, which I took over for another director that they fired, and I never should have even been on that picture. I'm not funny, and that picture was, that was a comedy, supposedly, which bombed horribly. I did what I knew how to do, but apparently it wasn't good. But we had a lot of money on that picture, and we ate it up,
And when you are working, at a faster pace, making these types of, TV projects, I'm just curious, like, is there any sequences or elements that were like the biggest challenges to deal with when you are moving at that fast speed?
I remember when we got to the truck. No, it was I don't remember what the name of that location is in Paris. There's a location where there's this big open space in front of, I think you're seeing the Eiffel Tower or something behind it. And it's historic because Hitler came there. And there are pictures of him standing where we shot, etc. And I wanted a great big fat wide shot with the two guys really small running horizontally across the frame. And when we got there, the place was full of Japanese tourists who had just gotten off a bus just as we arrived, or as we were set up and ready to go. And I said, this is really trouble, because I got to be out of here in 45 minutes. And the scout came to me and he said, don't worry, they'll take one picture, they'll get back on the bus and they'll be gone. And that's exactly what happened. So I guess that's what Japanese tourists do. But we had that kind of situation where, in Zurich, we have to clear out the traffic and, get rid of the people and bring our own people in. And those things take a lot of time, and you end up having to shoot quite quickly then. As far as a particular thing that was a trouble, I can't recall anything off the top of my head.
That's fair.
I'm sure there were lots of them. The first picture I did, the 2-hour picture, a television movie called Bitter Harvest, we had 17 and a half days.
Wow.
To shoot a 2-hour movie.
Wow.
How is that possible?
And I remember calling the producer at some point and saying, look, I got to have another day. I really, we can't get it all in the 17 days. And he said, I think you should stay another day, but the crew is going to be coming home on the 17th day. Oh, okay. I got it.
Well, in many ways, like, you are shooting an epic here. It is over a 3-hour runtime, and I'm sure you do not have anywhere near the amount of time that a filmmaker making a 3-hour, motion picture would get.
True.
Yeah.
Completely true. Yeah. I've never had that kind of time, I've always thought it was kind of funny that people always admired Clint Eastwood because he always comes in on time and under budget. But it's Clint Eastwood's company. He makes the budget and he makes the schedule. So of course he comes in on time and under budget. Nothing against Clint Eastwood.
No.
No. Well, we mentioned the cast sort of earlier on, but Richard Chamberlain and also Jacqueline Smith. What was it like working with those two? Any sort of stories of the three of you working together on the film?
Very cooperative, no problem at all. I think he was too big in showing his emotions. I think I should have brought him back more and let it be more subtle. But Richard was used to being on a series, on a television series, and sometimes, that moves in that direction. With a film like this, with the time to open up the character, I think it's better to move a little slower and a little subtler. But none of these actors, there was never a problem at all. Anthony Quayle is a big member of Lawrence of Arabia. So I was really thrilled to work with him. And later I got to work with Peter O'Toole on a miniseries. So that would, both of those things were fun. I was so taken with Peter O'Toole that the first 3 days I would say, Mr. O'Toole will start for here, and telling the camera people what I was going to do and stuff. And on the third day, he said, Peter, darling, Peter. Okay.
You cracked it when you get that. Exactly. Well, it's good to hear that Richard and Jacqueline were good to work with. And it's a hard one for an actor to pull off, because I think they looked a long time to find Matt Damon to do Bourne. So I imagine it was quite the task for Richard to try and pull off Jason Bourne. There's a lot going on under the surface of him. He's trying to figure a lot of stuff out, and to try and show that is probably quite tough. In terms of, I was going to ask about the expanded cast, and you kind of led me in there. You said at the start, obviously, this film was pitched to you as having Richard and Jacqueline already signed up. Script was already done, basically a complete package. Did you do any of the casting aside from that, though? Was there some casting for the film that you were a part
of? I think I had. I could say no to who they were suggesting, but I don't know that I ever did, because look at these names. They're terrific actors. And they were all in that age group that were they've already long ago proven how good they are. So, because we really didn't have any young people in this besides the two leads. The guy, the big, tall, bad guy that I don't even remember the guy's name.
George Lane Cooper.
Yeah, I should have said no to that. But everybody else was very good. I got a cast list here. I'm trying to see if there's anybody I had any problems with. I'm sure there wasn't. The guy who played Carlos, I didn't know at all. And he really only had 2 scenes. So
I want to ask about Damholm Elliott, who, at the time of recording this, we're about a week away from a new Indiana Jones movie, and he, of course, is an icon due to Raiders and Last Crusade. And I think he's fantastic in this movie. Creates a whole little world just in 20 minutes, half an hour of screen time.
Right.
I was just curious about the experience of working with him.
I just remember the first day going, wow. So I don't know if I ever even talked to him, in terms about acting.
Yeah.
He was just wonderful in it. And, you just get out of their way when they're good.
Right. Yeah. And I always say, if you're casting correctly, then your job is easy. Right.
It's 90% of it. If you got that in a good script, you're done. Unless you're an idiot, That's happened before. But no, the cast was great. We moved right along. And that's the other thing, that because they were all proven, there was no, I don't think I should do it that way, or none of that. They just would step in. Where do you want me to stand? Do you want me to move over there? That kind of thing. And we were off and running. Otherwise, we wouldn't have it done.
We were talking about the location shooting and also the sort of budget and the schedule. I imagine was quite quick to turn this around to get it to TV. Do you remember how long you had to film it, edit it, and then it was going to TV at all?
No, it's too long ago. I don't remember.
That's fair.
How long we had. I had a great editor, Ben Weissman, who I'd used many times before, and so I felt really solid about that. And Alan, his job, as I remember, was casting at Warner Brothers. So he knew everybody. I was really thrilled when Robert Ludlum was happy, because he was just full of praise. No, I don't recall being, having my throat pulled tight because of the budget. I was used to shooting fast, so that's not a problem for me. I mean, when Spielberg shoots fast too, I mean, it's not that I'm comparing myself to Spielberg, but I mean, you can do it, if you know how to do it, you can do it, and you can still get quality. So, and Eastwood shoots fast, I mean, there's a lot of guys who work that way.
Mm-hmm.
So these people were also used to that, I think.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Calling all agents. Keeping the lights on at SpyHards HQ ain't cheap. And frankly, nor is feeding this school of attack piranhas. So we need your help.
Roger that, Scott. Only at the SpyHards Patreon can you gain access to exclusive shows like Agents in the Field, which tackles non-spy films starring your favorite spy icons, and The Debrief, where we channel our inner solitaires and predict how the big spy movie news of today will impact tomorrow.
So make like a Treadstone agent and activate your Patreon membership at patreon.com/SpyHards today. Cam, tell the people what we have in our sights this week.
Scott, summer may be over, but that doesn't mean it's too late to catch up with all the great SpyHards content from the month of August on Patreon. I'm talking about reviews of the original Ocean's 11 and Mars Attacks, and the latest episode of The Debrief, where we broke down the new Gal Gadot thriller, Heart of Stone.
But before this message self-destructs, Cam, resume the spy chinks.
Was there any sense when you're shooting this one that you might reteam for an adaptation of the second book?
There was not, and it was such stupidity on my part, because when Robert Ludlum called me that night, the first thing I should have said was, well, let's do the next one, Why I was too stupid to suggest that we could have done a whole series of them, because I think he would have said yes. I mean, he was that thrilled. So no, I don't know why nobody thought of it until how many years later. And I don't know if we should be flattered because they saw it and said, oh, this is worth making it again, or they saw it and said, oh, they really screwed that up. Let's make it again and do it right. I don't know which it was. Or they didn't see it at all.
Well, it's an interesting one because, famously, a lot of writers don't like when their stuff is adapted, especially with spy films. Even like Ian Fleming wasn't a particularly big fan with the casting of Sean Connery, going all the way back to that. Like they tend to be very protective of their work. So to get that phone call from Robert Ludlum is quite the stamp. And I think, regardless of what the filmmakers of the 2002 Matt Damon film thought or saw, you got the author. So I mean, there isn't a higher pinnacle because he created the characters. I think you might have had trouble with a sequel because Carlos is killed in the film, whereas in the books he stays throughout. I think for a very long time he kind of haunts Jason Bourne for a long time. But then you could have quite easily invented a new villain. Not really a problem. My question then would be, sort of looking back on the project now, do you have any sort of other memories or fond memories from the production that we haven't spoken about so far? Anything else that we haven't mentioned on the set or hearing about it afterwards, seeing it on TV? I mean, do you get asked about this at all, this film?
No.
Wow. Interesting.
I don't. And that, to me, that's a bit surprising, although I guess it is, it's a long time ago. And I don't know if you'd say, I mean, when you looked at it, did you think, well, it's just kind of old fashioned?
No, I expected to. I went into it with that because I remembered that they had this movie at my video store when I was, younger, and I would see it on the shelf, and it'd always just be, I was a teenager, and so I would look at it and be like, oh, this looks kind of old fashioned. And so when I sat down to watch it, I really did expect something maybe a little creakier in terms of being this TV miniseries, and I was actually very surprised at how beautiful it often looked, how fantastic a lot of the performances were, and how much sort of tension was carried throughout. So, no, I would say maybe you might expect that, but in terms of actually revisiting it, no, I was actually quite surprised at the quality of it.
Well, that's very kind of you. Yeah, so I don't know why it isn't seen. It's not picked up on any of the streamers, and so I guess maybe Richard is just too long ago. people don't know who he is or who he was. I mean, he's still alive, but he's 89 years old or something, I think now. So maybe that's it. I don't know. And Jacqueline also is kind of yesterday's news, and me too.
Well, did you get any sort of like response to it when it aired or anything? Like, did you get feedback? Did it have any, impact on your career at the time?
Well, it was nominated for an Emmy,
Mm-hmm.
so it stayed alive from that. And yeah, my agent got a lot of noise because I think it's a big picture, for the kind of stuff that was usually being done at that time. So that just showed that I could handle that. And outside of the usual friends and people who you never know if they're telling you the truth, people, I don't know that it was the water cooler favorite,
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember, to tell you the truth.
I think you're bang on with the lack of ability to watch it. I think that hinders a lot of things now. It's not on streaming. I had to buy a DVD copy. I think that was I think there was a pressing in the early noughties that came out probably around about the time the film. That's the one.
That's the one.
Yeah. But that's no bonus features as far as my copy has. There's nothing like that. There's no commentary track on mine or anything. So there's no way to rediscover it. And if you're just discovering the Bourne films, there is nowhere else to go, and that's a shame.
Right.
That's a shame because I think it's a different vibe compared to Matt Damon's films, but I think it's very successful in its own way.
And even if you Google, you're not going to get this film. You're going to get the other ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Or the book.
Yeah.
And I actually think the differences between the two actually work in favor for both movies, because it does not feel like because I wasn't sure. I sat down to, rewatch or to watch this for the first time the other night. And there's always that, is this going to feel like kind of treading over the same ground for 3 hours? And not at all. Like, I think the two stand apart really well because they are so different.
Yeah, I love the new ones. I've watched them probably twice, at least twice, but all of them. So, I really like him. So it's easy to follow him around.
When you watched the 2002 one for the first time, did you sit there going like, this is not the story I was telling? Like, did it keep pulling you out of the movie?
No, I never expected them to, continue in that direction. They never do. They always feel it's necessary to add more, I don't know, of whatever they think is going to grab the audience. So it was pretty obvious to me before I started watching it that it wouldn't be that.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't. But they work great. Are they all directed by the same guy?
No,
not the fourth one. Well, Doug Liman did the first, and then Paul Greengrass did the second,
right,
third, and fifth, and then Tony Gilroy did the fourth.
Yeah,
but they all have sort of the same visual style as each other. The first one, the Bourne Identity, really sort of sets the tone for the rest of them. There's no outlier of the five particularly. They really all do kind of work together.
Well, Greengrass is a real stylist. I mean, what he changed things when he first came in with his bang, 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 bang editing, and that sort of thing. But you're right, he didn't carry it through on this one.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose then sort of my final question on Bourne, looking back on it, and you revisited it recently for this discussion. Just overall, what are your thoughts on what you produced? Are you happy with it? Is there any things you'd change looking back now?
No, just what I started with, in terms of what I might do with the characters and their dark side.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the way I shot it, no, and the locations, no, and the actors, same. I was pleased with what I saw not today, but when I watched it last week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose then moving us out and into sort of your wider work, one of the questions I wanted to ask, because you've done a lot of feature films, TV miniseries, TV movies, is there something that you made that you're particularly proud of that you don't think gets the love it should?
Yeah, I made two pictures that I think are in that category. One's called "Kiss the Sky," that you should look at. It's really an interesting film by a really interesting author. And the other one's called "Gulag," and I'm not sure you can even get that one anymore. David Keith is the star, but it was a tough picture to make, and it was because we shot a lot of it on the glacier up in Norway, and I was proud of the way I directed it. Kiss the Sky is a story of two guys who just get so bored with their lives that they decide to just take off. They're buddies, they have wives and they have kids, but they just can't take it anymore. And what happens to them? And I just think the script is dynamite. And the people who have seen it, I get emails every now and then saying, why don't more people know about this film? It's really good. When we showed it, you usually show it to get reaction, and they fill out these stupid cards and tell. I had one guy walk up to me and he said, how do you put it? Oh, you've been reading my mail, he said. That's how real it was to him, this picture. So yeah, those are two I'm proud of that have not gotten what they deserve.
It's interesting looking at. I'm just looking at Gulag now on IMDb, and it's about sort of a guy who was accused of spying for America. So,
right,
little spy connection there. I like that.
Yeah, the first 30 minutes of it, you got to sort of get through, and then after that, I think it gets quite good.
And the last question we have for you, Roger, and this has been asked to everyone we've ever had on the show, and you maybe queued it up earlier, but we'll see what we get. What is your favorite spy movie of all time?
I'm trying to narrow it down. I love 3 Days of the Condor.
Great film.
I'd have to pick out a Bond movie. I don't know which one it would be. Maybe it would definitely be with the new guy. What's his name?
Daniel Craig.
Yeah. No, it would be, I guess, Russia with Love with Sean. That got me into that whole feeling, Those are the two that come to mind.
It's interesting you pick From Russia with Love, too, because that's one of the closest to the actual source material. And you have your Bourne Identity, which is very close to the source material as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I can't argue with either of those choices. They're on our list of the best spy movies ever made, so they're in good company there. I think all that's left to say from us, Roger, is thank you for your time and thank you for shedding a light on the story of the Bourne Identity, because this story has never been told.
Well, I'm glad that you've brought it to the forefront for a few minutes.
I want people to go check out this TV miniseries. I think it's important. I think if you're a fan of the Bourne saga, as it were, you should learn where it came from. And this is the best adaptation of the book. There it is. So yeah, Roger, again, thank you for your time today.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a good day.
Thank you. Well, there you go, folks. That was our chat with Mr. Roger Young. I want to thank Roger once again for taking the time to speak with us about his work on the Bourne Identity and much, much more. Cam, what did you think?
Well, Scott, this filled in a lot of gaps for me, because whenever we do these episodes where we review a movie, I will go and do notes on the behind the scenes.
Yep.
Finding behind the scenes information on the 1988 miniseries Bourne Identity is very difficult. There's absolutely nothing on the Wikipedia page, and you start Googling around, only little morsels of details here or there. So like this interview may have been one of our most invaluable in terms of painting the larger picture in terms of how this thing came to be.
For sure. And you have to think that the creators of the 2002 Matt Damon version of this story had to have gone back and watched this at some point. And I've not necessarily spoken to people involved, but, studied it and studied how it was adapted and taken notes. So I think this is an important sort of touchstone in Treadstone, touchstone.
Huh.
In the sort of work of Robert Ludlum and being adapted for the screen. It was actually really cool to find out that it had Ludlum's stamp of approval.
I'm actually surprised it didn't have more of a second life with the release of, the 2002 film and then the various sequels. I just wonder how much that is to do with the fact that at that point in time, streaming wasn't a thing. And I do wonder if nowadays, if you have an upcoming Bourne film, they would have been making sure this thing was available so people could watch it as they build anticipation for the new movie.
Well, like I mentioned in the interview, like there was a DVD release around the time that the Matt Damon film was brought out, and I didn't mention this in the interview, but it reminded me a lot of when they re-released the Harry Palmer TV movies around the time that Bourne came out, with these really horrible artwork that's clearly not Michael Caine running from helicopters. They are quite spectacular. If you can find them online, look at the artwork. It's great. But yeah, that was like the last printing of that sort of TV movie as well. You can't find those in regular circulation, and it feels like this sort of era of storytelling is slowly just being shuffled away.
Well, yeah, the idea of the 2-night miniseries event, not really a thing anymore. I mean, so many of the shows that we watch now are serialized. They are, 6 to 8 episode series. It's more like the original format has been adapted into what is just common television now.
Yeah, because it feels like it's the same story spread over 8 to 10 episodes instead of 3 hours or 4 hours like you get with the Bourne Identity. I imagine if this was adapted again, I could definitely see this as a 10-hour, 10-part show.
Well, there was the Treadstone TV show, which told a serialized story over a handful of episodes. It only, I think, lasted one season, but within the time period of, the 80s when this was made, I remember this period. I remember watching, it would have been the early 90s or mid 90s, the adaptation of Peter Benchley's The Beast, which, Peter Benchley wrote Jaws. He also wrote a book called Beast about a killer giant octopus that attacked a town.
Of course he did. Of course he did.
And maybe it was a squid. I can't remember if it was an octopus or a squid. Might have been a squid. But that was a 2-night event, and I remember breathlessly watching each installment. I also owned the DVD, cutting the two parts together. They also did Peter Benchley's Creature, about a Nazi experiment merging a human and a shark together. Again, these were 2-night events, and for me, they were very exciting. They felt kind of epic unto themselves, and they were different than what you were typically watching on TV, where shows had, 24 episode runs, 22 episode runs. The idea of these kind of epic movies spread over 2 nights were just really cool.
Well, they were events television before we had events television. Now we have all these you remember like the noughties when everyone was watching stuff like 24 and it became like water cooler chat. Lost was another one as well that was very much events television. This was the original version of that with these TV movies. That they felt different to what you were seeing in theaters, and they felt different to what you were watching on television. It was like this middle of the sort of a combination of the two. I don't necessarily think I could sort of point to any myself. I know Star Trek did it a couple of times. Star Trek Voyager had the Dark Frontier, I think it was, which was basically a 2-hour episode, more or less.
Yeah.
I remember that getting a lot of promo when I watched that. And so I've seen similar things, but maybe just sort of spinning off into the discussion with Roger, one thing I found quite fascinating was the fact that there was not a lot of pre-production that he was involved with. He was basically handed a mostly filled out cast and a completed script.
Yeah, that was one aspect of this interview that I was really looking for those details going in, which is that you and I have talked to a number of directors who've helmed motion pictures, spy films that we've tackled on the show. The process of a motion picture versus, a TV event like this. And just hearing him break it down, when he joins the project, they have a cast, they've got a crew, and he needs to pull this off in a very limited amount of time with a limited budget to get it on TV. Like, just the difference between the two processes, I was very much anticipating and paid off.
I have to imagine that with television, especially around that time, they probably had a release date already built into their programming. Like, they knew when this was coming out before it even probably started shooting. So there wasn't really any way they could just sort of say, oh, we need 4 more weeks in Paris.
Yeah.
Like, it just, there's no money for it and there's no time. But you look at, like, well, I think we mentioned Clint Eastwood, for instance, in this discussion. I'm sure there's a release date for Clint Eastwood's next film, but if he was to push it back, he absolutely can.
Yeah, if Clint says, "I'm not ready," then the studio goes, "When will you be ready?"
How can we make you feel more ready?
Yeah, I think it's maybe a little more applicable to some of these franchise films that exist now, where they hire directors who have maybe one independent film under their belt, and they have a release date, and they'd better hit that release date or else.
The mouse will get them.
The Mouse or WB or various other studios overseeing these big franchises.
Yeah, but what about you, Cam? Something you liked about the chat?
I really enjoyed hearing him talk about like the production aspects of this, because I don't know about you, and I mentioned it in the interview. Going in, I kind of expected something a little creaky looking, and that's not what I got. Like, the location work in this movie was fantastic, and discovering that the cinematographer had also done Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is one of the most acclaimed television spy stories ever, might be the number one.
Yeah,
was fascinating. And while the collaboration was maybe a little thorny, the ultimate result of that collaboration, I think, was really effective.
I think so too. I think we were all taken aback by just how beautiful, especially at certain points, this film looked. And, some of the locations they use, I wouldn't have been surprised if we saw in other feature films. There's one situation I mentioned that is actually, there's one location, I should say, that was actually featured in the most recent John Wick film.
Yeah.
So, and you have to think this was done on a shoestring budget and probably done very quickly. So the fact that they had, the time to set this up, Roger had the vision to, stage it in a way that would still hold up in, I don't know, almost 40 years.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive for, what could have been just a job he did for 6 months in 1987.
And also, this is a TV movie with a limited budget, as he said, and it has locations that are really effective. They're beautiful to see on screen. And how many movies do we see that cost $200 million, $300 million, where they've just green screened in the background a famous location, and it looks cheap? Like, this movie holds up, I think, quite well.
I think that just goes to sort of attest to the use of practical effects whenever you can, and real sets and real locations. Oftentimes now it's probably cheaper.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just I know that production companies like to use digital effects because they can control the environment more.
Yeah.
We even mentioned the story about the Japanese tourists almost ruining the shot. That's not something you have to worry about when you're working on a set. So there it might be a bit cheaper, but you can't fault the handiwork in this film. It still looks great now. So I'm glad that Roger had the eye for it and he had the right team.
For sure. And I also just really enjoyed, unrelated to Bourne, his story about meeting David Lean. That is a fantastic meeting your hero moment.
Yeah, getting sort of cussed out by your hero.
I mean, you and I get cussed out by our heroes all the time, right?
And our listeners. Thanks, guys.
No kidding.
Yeah, they say don't meet your heroes. I've had a couple of examples of that myself. I remember once bumping into writer and sort of comic book maker Harlan Ellison, science fiction writer, I suppose is probably his best term, and getting cussed out for him for, I think, not having the right sugar, even though I didn't work at Starbucks, which was a very weird day, I have to say. So yeah, I'm glad that Roger got the same sort of treatment from the director of Lawrence of Arabia.
I, too, have met a number of Star Trek celebs, primarily because of our experience at all these various conventions. And I'll tell you, the stories where they're a little prickly or something are way better than the stories where they were just nice and you walked away going, cool.
Yeah, except for Leonard Nimoy. I think the fact that he was super nice and the fact that he's Leonard Nimoy trumps all of this, because he was quite the guy.
That's true.
Well, I think that wraps us up for our chat with Roger. Our look at the Bourne Identity once again. I mean, a couple of things just to note, I think, before we wrap up. Firstly, this is our, I suppose, second foray into the world of TV movies. The first being our Harry Palmer TV movies.
Yeah, that's right. We've done some TV pilots, Like, for example, that Charlie's Angels pilot we talked about was the length of a TV movie, but yeah.
And we did talk about, I think, the True Lies TV episode that came out as well.
Yeah, we've done a few TV shows here or there.
Yeah, I mean, the general idea is we just stick to movies, but I think there are a few special TV movies out there that we will probably find time for. I know, like, the Smiley's people, the George Smiley stuff is very highly regarded in spy movie circles, so I think we probably will try and make time for that at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And the original version of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, again, that often gets referenced when we ask people who come on the show their favorite spy movies. They'll say that, even though it was a TV show. I think we'll probably make time for that. But what I'm keen to know is from you all, are there other TV movies in the spy genre that I haven't mentioned there that you think we should take a look at? And Cam and I will take that under consideration, maybe add it to our master list.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I mean, we are going to look in the future as well at the Man from U.N.C.L.E. Films, which were televised in some parts and then theatrical in others.
Yeah, so it kind of walks the line there. And the other thing to maybe note is, I know we did our Jason Bourne roundtable like a year and a half ago, maybe at this point, and that was to us probably the last time we talked about Bourne. Obviously, we found a bit more time to talk about Jason Bourne this year, but this probably marks the end.
Never say never. Never say never.
That's true. That's true. There could be a sixth film. You never know. I'd like to go back to Bourne. I think he's a very interesting character. I think he's a very rich character. I would maybe like to see it rebooted at some point.
Oh, it will happen. For sure. I think they're just going to need to find a new angle, but I think Jason Bourne will return.
What's the new angle? Is it like J.C. Bourne? Jacqueline Bourne? Jane Bourne.
I don't know what it could be. Like, here's the thing. There's so many books. Robert Ludlum only wrote so many before, another author took over. But, like, there's so many stories there that completely diverge from what the stories that we saw in the Matt Damon series. So I think you could even just, like, reboot and start somewhere in the middle of those stories and just go on from there.
Or alternatively, we're living in a time where film companies like to go back to their lesser works and try and make them better.
Yeah.
Seems to be happening in a lot of like the Marvel films that they're referencing the Incredible Hulk now, which is strange. So maybe you get a Matt Damon, Jeremy Renner sixth Bourne film, put them both together and sort of redeemed legacy.
I think Matt Damon said no to that. He was like, I'm not doing a movie with Aaron Cross in it. But here's another thing. People would have said when Sean Connery was retiring as Bond, well, you can't do it. Like, that was a definitive Bond. And I think we say that now because Matt Damon is our definitive Jason Bourne. But Bond's had a few other eras, and I think Bourne will likely wind up in the same scenario. It's just going to take maybe a little longer between reinventions than Bond has had.
Well, there you go. It proves it's all still to play for. But that was our look at 1988's TV version of the Bourne Identity. It's been great to go back to the world of Jason Bourne. But Cam, the question goes to you. So what are we talking about next week?
Yes, we are continuing with a different franchise. We're going to wrap up the Mechanic franchise with 2011's The Mechanic Resurrection, starring Jason Statham.
Yeah, it's about time we say goodbye to Arthur Bishop. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to join us next week as we tackle The Mechanic Resurrection. And if you like what you heard on this interview, please consider leaving us a 5-star review wherever you are listening to this podcast. And if you don't already, make sure you hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with all of the latest spy jinx. If you don't already, please make sure you follow us on social media, discreetly, of course, at SpyHards. That's SpyHards on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next time, listeners, Cam and I are going to go and try and open the door for David Lean.